Hey everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. In this DIY, I'm going to show you how to replace your valve cover gasket on your E46 M3 and also show you how to replace the spark plugs while we're there. So the valve cover gasket on the M3 is a little bit different than the non-Ms, but the overall gist of the area of where it's at and all that is pretty similar. So in order to do this, we've got this M3 here. So this is a 2003 BMW M3 with the S54. This process is going to be very similar for any car that's equipped with the S54. To start off, it's always good practice to go ahead and disconnect your battery. We are going to be dealing with the ignition coil harness, and also we're going to be removing this positive battery cable as well. So it's a good idea to go ahead and disconnect your battery, at least one of the terminals, so that way you don't mess anything up. To start off, we're going to remove this strut bar, which is held in with four 13mm nuts. If your car has never been touched before, you might have caps on these as well. So just pull the caps up with the flathead, and then you can remove the 13mm nuts. With the strut bar out of the way, now we can remove the cabin filter housing. So first you want to take off these four clips. You can just use a flathead or something to pry against it. Once you have the cover off, you can pull the wires out. We're going to disconnect the positive battery cable that's going to the starter. It's held in with a 19mm nut. There are three little tabs right here that you have to twist. So twist them counterclockwise, just a quarter of a turn. Then you can slide the cover towards you, pull it off, take out the filter, and then you will see four Torx 30 bolts. So we're going to remove all four of those. The bolts will not come out all the way, they'll just unscrew from the retainer behind them, but they'll be still stuck onto the cabin filter assembly. Oh, that one did come out all the way. Usually they don't. Now you want to lift up and away. Now we can remove this breather hose. You want to push the two tabs together like this right here. As you can see, this one's already broken, so we should be able to just lift that up. It's a good idea to have another one of these on hand if you're going to do this DIY, just because chances are they will break. On this side it's still intact, so you want to push the two things together like that and lift up, just like that. I'm just going to move this cable out of the way. So this car is actually missing the part of the fan shroud that goes right here. So part of that fan shroud, there's a push pin right here. What you have to do is you just have to lift up the top part and then the whole thing comes out. And there's one more behind the cover that attaches to this section of the rest of the fan shroud. So you want to pull that pin out as well. Same thing, pull the middle section out, then the whole thing comes out. And then you want to push it towards the engine and lift up, because there's a little hook that goes onto the rest of the shroud. You'll see it if you have it on your car still. Then the reason we remove the fan shroud, just so you have more access to all of this, because it does cover part of the valve cover. Now we have this vanity cover here. The vanity cover is just held in with 10mm nuts. The nuts are a little bit different on this. Usually they look like this. But regardless, they should be 10mm nuts. Go to remove all six. You want to take off the oil filler cap, that way you can actually pull off the vanity cover. To pull the cover off, just lift it up. And go ahead and put the oil cap back on, that way you don't drop anything else inside. You could also cover up the breather. This is actually like the CCV for the M3, so you can cover that up so you don't drop anything in there as well. Now you can see all of the ignition coils as well as the harness for it, and also the O2 sensor harness. So you want to remove the O2 sensor harness from here first so you have access to the ignition coils. In order to do that, there's usually little tabs in each one of these holes, but they're broken off already. And then you also have it going over these two studs. So these, you just have to push the two tabs together on both of them, and then you can lift it up and out. Now we're going to lift up all of the ignition coil connectors. So just pull it straight up like that and pull the connector out. Do that for all 6. Once you've removed all 6 ignition coil connectors, then we're going to remove 2 8mm bolts so we can remove this whole harness. Here are the 2 bolts. Now you also have a ground strap that comes off of this harness for the ignition coils, and it goes to the side of the head. Right underneath the valve cover, it's held in with a 13mm bolt. There's a 13mm bolt. Just lift the harness up and put it to the driver's side of the engine bay. Now that we have all that out of the way, we can remove all 6 of these coils. A trick I like to use, if you can't just pull them up with your finger, is use some kind of long screwdriver or an extension like this and just lift up like that. These pull straight up and out. It's good practice to label where each one of these came out or just place them accordingly. But that's if you're usually chasing down a misfire. That way you know which one came out of which cylinder. With all the ignition coils removed, you have access to all 6 spark plugs. So good practice for spark plugs. You take one out, you put the new one in, and then you just do one at a time. That way you don't forget to put anything in or you don't drop anything in. And all of these are just going to be 16mm sockets or a spark plug socket that's 5/8. And the spark plugs you want to use are either going to be made by Bosch or the NGKs. I usually suggest going with NGK. So I'm not going to remove the spark plugs right now. We're just going to continue on with the valve cover gasket. So in order to replace the valve cover gasket, you do have to remove the valve cover. There's still a couple of wires and harnesses that we want to take off. So there's these 2 O2 sensors right here. You can just pull them straight off. You also have this wire going to the camshaft sensor down here. You can go in and pull that off. That way it just makes it easier and you don't really put any stress on the connector. So to remove the connector, you just press this and you should be able to pull it out. As you can see, there's a lot of oil going onto this connector. So that valve cover gasket is really leaking onto here. Or also the camshaft sensor, there's an O-ring on it that could also possibly be leaking. And you want to just continue pulling up all these wires out from the clips. Just try to remember where they go. They are kind of molded since they've been on there for a while. So even when you're reassembling, you should be able to just follow how they're molded to it. So you can just tuck them down in here. That way they're out of the way when you're trying to remove the valve cover. This one you can zip tie so that it doesn't come in the way when you're removing the valve cover. The next thing you want to remove is this banjo bolt that goes to the valve cover itself. So that's going to be held in with a 17mm banjo bolt. And it does have 2 washers, one on each side of the actual line. And make sure, even if you drop them, you do have to replace them. Just try not to drop it, that way you can pull it out and you don't have something just rattling around in the actual heat shields. So once again, this is a 17mm banjo bolt. and there it goes. Luckily mine fell right here, so I could just get it with a magnet. But what I like to do is always have a lot of these on hand, so when you're going to put this bolt back, it is going to be hard for you to get that second washer on. So it's always good to have a couple of extra ones. That way, even if you drop a couple, you still have them. They're not that expensive, and you do have to replace these every time you remove the bolt. So you have the bolt, you have one washer, the line goes through, and then another washer, and then it threads into the valve cover. With everything else removed from the valve cover, the only thing that's holding the valve cover to the head now is just all of the fasteners, the bolts. So they're all 10mm bolts. The only two ones that are different is the one that's right here in this top corner and the one in the other top corner. And these two bolts also have different seal washers as well. So the seal washers that go under these are skinnier than the rest of them. The rest are all the same. So whenever you buy a valve cover gasket set or kit, it usually comes with all of these washers, and also comes with 13 of these and 2 of these, because there's only 2 of those. And all of these bolts are exactly the same. They're all 10mm. Even these have the stud for the actual vanity cover. Those are also 10mm. So this process becomes a lot easier if you have like a impact or any kind of power tool. That way you can just pull them all off. You don't want to use these to tighten them and put it back on, but you do want to use them to pull it off. And main reason you don't want to use these to put them back on is because it's easy to cross thread them, and you don't want that to happen. So as you can see right here, someone has replaced this before, and they didn't do it, or they probably used an impact to tighten it, and as a result, the actual stud that sits inside the head also came out. If this happens to you, you can hold the stud with an open-ended wrench and use another socket or wrench on the actual bolt that's going onto the cover, and just, hold that and pull this one off. And then you do want to screw this back in, the actual stud that goes on the head. Make sure you screw that back in while the valve cover is off, because once the valve cover goes back on, you cannot tighten this down to proper specs. And when you're pulling off all these bolts, try to get the actual rubber washer or grommet with it. And there's also a metal washer right here before the grommet. To help remove it, you can use a flathead, just pry against it, and pull it off. So you can see how this one's much thicker, the grommet, than that one that came off the stud on the top. These two studs right here do not have washers. They're actually built in to the stud. And as you can see, this one didn't come out with the head stud. It only came out with what it's supposed to be. The two in the back corner, you're not going to be able to use an impact because of the actual chassis is in the way. So you want to get those out by hand, but the rest you can. If the bolt doesn't like to come out once you have it unscrewed all the way, then you can use that flathead to pry it out with the grommet. With all of the bolts and grommets out of the way, make sure all of the wiring harnesses and everything is tucked underneath the valve cover so it doesn't catch on it while you're lifting it up. We've got this O2 sensor harness. We have it zip tied so that it doesn't come in the way, but it might still come in the way a little bit, so just be careful of that, especially when you're reassembling. Try to get any dirt and debris out of the way so nothing falls in. Now we're just going to lift it up. It might take a little bit, especially as you can see on here, someone has RTV'd around like most of the gasket, which on these you usually don't have to do that, mainly because the whole valve cover is metal, so it doesn't really warp, so you don't have to worry about putting RTV on any of the half moons or anything like that. Now here we have the whole gasket. The gasket has these little round parts that actually sits into grooves on the head itself. Like you see, this one was not sitting all the way, or maybe I pulled it out, but it has to sit inside the groove like that. So when you are reassembling, make sure it sits like that. If you have any RTV anywhere, make sure you take it all off. Try to keep everything clean. You don't want anything falling in here for sure. And you also have 6 spark plug tube seals, so they're just individual. You can just lift them out. Make sure you don't forget to put new ones on before you put the valve cover on. So all of this should come as one kit. And I'll try to link all the parts and the washers, even for this, down below. That way you have everything. Now this is also a good time to look at your exhaust hub and see if the tabs are actually breaking or if they've already broken. And the main way to look at that, let me go ahead and show you. So this is the exhaust hub right here. The oil pump disc is on this side of it. So you can see there's a tab that goes into the hole on the oil pump disc. So that's what you want to look at if you want to see if your exhaust hub tabs are breaking. The easiest way to tell if they are breaking or if they've already broken is you will see a bunch of marring on that oil pump disc. And obviously the tab will be missing. So I'm going to have a video on this soon that goes over how to replace and how to prevent this from happening. And also an upgrade, which is made by Bison or Bason Systems, however you say it. And they actually have an oil pump disc that's re-drilled. So the main reason the exhaust hub tab breaks and whatnot is because of the clearance in that hole. I have a video that goes over the whole Vanos of the S54. Make sure you go watch that. And I should have a bunch of videos posted soon on how to do preventative maintenance on the Vanos and make it somewhat bulletproof. But continuing on with the valve cover gasket DIY, make sure you remove all the spark plug tube seals. And before you do anything else, just clean all of these surfaces and go ahead and put the new seals on there. That way you don't forget. Then you can go ahead and remove the whole valve cover gasket and clean all those surfaces too. Now, like I said, a lot of people advocate for using RTV and stuff. Honestly, I don't think it's a necessity. I usually don't use it because it usually just ends up making more of a mess than anything else. If the gasket's going to start leaking, a little bit of RTV, yes, it might prevent it, for a little bit longer, but eventually it's still going to leak out. So, especially with these, with the metal valve covers, they don't really warp, so it's not really necessary. So I wouldn't put it on because now I'm just going to have to spend a lot of time cleaning all these areas wherever the RTV went, and then you got to be very careful it doesn't fall into the engine. With the whole valve cover off, it's also a good time to do a valve adjustment. So the valve adjustment, mainly what that entails is you want to measure how much clearance is between each of those shims and the valve. So the shims are just trying to get the clearance to a certain spec. So if they're not in spec, you have to change the shim out. You have to buy a whole shim kit for it. I'll actually have a DIY on that as well, so you can go ahead and watch that and take care of that while you're at it. The valve adjustment you want to do around every 40,000 miles. The valve cover gasket on these S54s actually are reusable. So if yours is not leaking, you can go ahead and use that same one. Honestly, I wouldn't suggest it because it's only like 60-70 bucks. So might as well just go ahead and replace it every time you pull it off. So let's try to pull this off and let's see how much of a mess that RTV has made. See how it's already getting strung on right here? You don't want that to fall into the engine bay. Or into the engine. Dang, they really glued it back here. And you can see how they actually got it on top of this when they were putting it on. So now I'm going to have to clean that up as well. You can see it's all over this retainer. The retainer even popped up because it was stuck. And that's why I don't suggest using RTV on a valve cover gasket. RTV, yes, it has its place in certain areas, but it just makes a mess. And if you are going to put it, only put it in the areas where it needs to go. For example, you can put it in this area right here where the Vanos attaches to the head. There's this crack right here. Same thing on this side. And then you can put it only in the half moons in the back. Don't go around and put it over the whole thing, every corner. It doesn't need it. So now I'm going to spend the rest of my night cleaning up all this mess. The assembly, like always, is the opposite of the removal. I know you guys usually like to see me reassemble everything, but I'm going to be doing a lot more work on here. So, I don't want to waste too much time doing that. But here's a quick few tips when you are reassembling. First things first, make sure the harness is underneath the section where the valve cover is going to go. So just push it down there. That way you don't have it in the way of the valve cover. And already told you the whole spiel about the RTV. It's a good idea to go ahead and change the O-ring that goes on the camshaft sensor as well. So you just pull that off. There's just one bolt on the bottom. Pull that off and change that O-ring. And then after that, just clean all the surfaces. You want everything to be clean. Even on the valve cover, make sure everything is clean. Replace all of the grommets that go on each bolt. And then once again, for this banjo bolt that goes through here into the valve cover, make sure you have the bolt, washer, then you have the line, another washer, and then it threads into the valve cover. And make sure you have a bunch of these washers. That way if you drop them, you don't have to worry about it, and you can just put another one on. And make sure you get the correct size washer. If you try to just retrofit something that you might have laying around a little bit bigger, it is not going to seal properly. Now besides that, while you're here, it's a good time to do that valve adjustment like I said. Change all the spark plugs if you need to. Go ahead and try to do all of the Vanos stuff. I highly recommend doing it just because, you know, it's going to prevent you from having to worry about, you know, the Vanos, the actual Vanos going bad. You don't want any of those sprocket bolts backing out. You don't want the hub tabs breaking, stuff like that. I'll have videos going over DIYs on each one of those things, so make sure you stay tuned for that. If you need any other Vanos refreshers or just want to learn more about it, I'll have a video linked down below that goes over the Vanos issues. And that's it for this DIY. If you're still leaking oil after doing the valve cover gasket, make sure you go check out the CPV O-ring. I've got a video on my channel that says the most misdiagnosed S54 oil leak. Make sure you go check that out. That shows you how to replace that CPV O-ring as well. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you like this DIY. Make sure you stay tuned for more videos. Go check out all of our social media. Make sure you go check out the vlog channel at Shop Life Vlogs. And I'll see you guys in my next video.